Here's your host, Alex Garrett.
All right, welcome inside to One Leg Up on Sports with Alex Garrett. And Lou Terminello and I have a longtime friend of this podcast, of the Viscardi Center, Mr. Kenny Albert. Thanks for joining us today, Kenny.
Great to be with you guys, Alex. We saw each other at MSG last night prior to the Rangers game against Montreal. So it had been a while, but always great to see you, and glad things are going so well.
It's so awesome to know that you have roots in Port Washington. You know, it's an interesting commute out there and from Penn Station and back, but to know that that's your hometown, it's a small world, isn't it?
Well, first of all, it's the best train line. I grew up in Sands Point, Port Washington, lived there basically from first grade through high school and then back during the summers during my college years. And it's the first stop or the last stop on the train line, depending on how you look at it. So if you're coming home and you fall asleep, you won't miss your stop because it's
That's
the last stop. And during my childhood, when the Jets were playing at Shea Stadium and, of course, the Mets, I would take the train all the time. It would stop at Shea and then go on to Penn Station, Madison Square Garden. You didn't have to switch anywhere, so certainly my favorite train line.
It's funny that that line is now permanently on. Stops at Mets Willets Point every day now, game day or not. Anyway, about last night, though, right? I mean, Chris Kreider, hat trick, sixth career, I believe, of his career. 6-game win streak. Pretty strong out of the break, isn't it? Is this one of their fastest starts out of the break?
It is a great start out of the break, and two big wins right out of the All-Star break over Colorado and Tampa Bay, two of the really good teams in the league. So it's been a terrific stretch. Jonathan Quick picked up another win last night. Igor Shesterkin was terrific in his last game against Calgary. So when you look at the start the Rangers had at the beginning of the season, and then the recent play, they have an exciting weekend coming up with the Stadium Series game on Sunday against the Islanders at MetLife Stadium. So an exciting game last night for the fans. Kreider picked up the hat trick. Adam Fox had 4 assists. Mika Zibanejad, Artemi Panarin, 3 points apiece. So I'm sure for you, Alex, it was a fun game to be at as a fan.
Oh, yeah, me and Gabby had a blast. Now, Lou, I know you know the Albert family a little bit. Weigh in here with us for Terminello's take.
Like I said, with the Nets, my first 5-6 years with the Nets, I knew his uncle Steve very well before he went to the West Coast to do Warrior TV, and a great guy, and a guy who, just like Kenny, Kenny comes from a family of sports broadcasting royalty, and obviously one of the most versatile families as far as calling so many different sports. Steve called for all 4 major sports like Kenny's doing now, and your dad did. Now, I knew Al a little bit when he was with Indiana, and I don't think he and Ken, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think Al called all 4 major leagues, correct?
I don't think he did baseball or football, but he was heavily involved in basketball, hockey, and boxing for a long time with USA Network. Steve did call the Jets on the radio for several years and also called Mets baseball from 79 through 81. So Steve was a member of the 4-sport club plus boxing as well. In fact, he's a member of the Boxing Hall of Fame.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Steve replaced Lindsey Nelson.
He did. He was the first to break in. The Mets had the 3 original broadcasters for a long time: Bob Murphy, Ralph Kiner, and Lindsey Nelson. From 62, the Mets' first season, until 78. And then Lindsey Nelson left after that 78 season, and Steve became a part of the Mets broadcast crew in 79.
Yeah, no, great guy. Just great. Give him my best when you talk.
I certainly will. Definitely
really,
will. I'll be back in the New York area.
Okay, great. So you're talking about the Rangers. They went through that 12-12-1 stretch, and now they won 6 in a row. The one guy that has surprised me going into this season, Jonathan Quick. When the Rangers signed him, I went, okay. I thought that athletically, and he's one of the most athletic goaltenders in the NHL. I really thought he had lost it. And he's been, correct me if I'm wrong, he's been a marvel for the Rangers this year. I mean, he's been as good as he's ever been. I mean, they have as good a backup.
Yeah, he's been terrific. When you look at his last couple of seasons, the numbers probably weren't what they were earlier in his career, but he set the bar so high, winning 2 Stanley Cups in LA and then a Conn Smythe Trophy. He was playoff MVP in 2012. And then he goes and wins another cup in Vegas last year.
That's right.
He wasn't the guy in the playoffs, obviously, but he did win some big games for them during the regular season down the stretch. So he won his third Stanley Cup ring. Never expected to be traded from LA. Thought he would finish his career there, but winds up getting traded to Columbus last year. And then the next day they moved him over to Vegas. Signs with the Rangers, his favorite team as a youngster, grew up in Connecticut. His father-in-law, Mike Backman, played for the Rangers back in the early 80s. So he has a long history with the club, even before he signed with the Rangers as a fan and some family ties. But he's been tremendous.
Yes.
Heading into the last night, he was in the top 5 in the NHL and goals against average and save percentage. Igor Shesterkin, another guy who set the bar really, really high when he won a Vezina Trophy a couple of years ago, back in the 2021-22 season. He looks to be back on his game, shut out Calgary the other night. So the Rangers probably have the best 1-2 punch as far as goaltenders in the entire NHL. You have to put Boston up there as well with Swayman and Ullmark, but not many teams can say that they have the goaltending that the Rangers have with Shesterkin and Quick.
And do you think Jonathan is sort of mentoring Igor? Because Igor is still fairly young at this. So do you feel like a mentorship's going on there as well?
Well, unless you're in the locker room, not sure exactly what's going on there. He seems to be a great teammate from all accounts. From everything I hear, Jonathan Quick is a great teammate. So you would think that would be the case as far as helping to mentor. They have one of the greatest goalie coaches in all time in Benoit Allaire, who's been with the Rangers, throughout the entire Henrik Lundqvist era. Now has mentored Igor Shesterkin for 5 or 6 years. And you look at some of the former backups with the Rangers, Alexander Georgiev and Cam Talbot, who also worked under Allaire. They were both all-stars this year, along with Shesterkin. So, the goaltending and the coaching by Benoit Allaire over the last 2 decades here in New York with the Rangers has been just tremendous.
And you talk about goaltending in general, and obviously I've been watching hockey a little bit longer than you, and I think that's one of the biggest changes from when I started watching and listening to your dad in the mid '60s. The athletic ability of the goaltenders is just, to me, just phenomenal. I mean, it's to me at an all-time high. I mean, you talk about Jonathan Quick, his flexibility. I mean, sometimes he makes saves that like he's an elastic man. These goaltenders are just at another level.
Yeah, they really are. And when you look at also the equipment, sometimes when you look at the video from the 70s and 80s, the goalies look so small.
They do.
Equipment's a lot bigger these days, but you're right about the athleticism, whether it was Lundqvist or now Shesterkin and Quick, Mike Richter, even before Henrik came in, just incredible athleticism. And sometimes it's hard to believe that a team can score 7 goals in a game when you look at how good these goaltenders are. Sam Montembeault of Montreal, who allowed the 7 goals last night, he was spectacular in the last game the Rangers played against the Canadiens back in early January.
You talk about the changes in the game, and obviously it's not as physical and as it was in the 70s. The rules have changed. But I think right now this is probably the best era of hockey. Yeah, we like the rock'em sock'em hockey when we were younger and, the old days. But I think as far as there's never been as many skilled players in the NHL as there is now, in my opinion.
Well, I think you're right. When I think back to my childhood, those Gretzky Edmonton teams were pretty highly skilled and fun to watch. The Montreal and Islander dynasties before that. But when you look at the amount of high level young players that are out there now, it's just so much fun to watch, whether it's Connor McDavid in Edmonton, Nathan McKinnon in Colorado, and those guys are veterans, but some of the youngsters like Jack Hughes in New Jersey and Connor Bedard, who came back from an injury last night in Chicago, and Matthew Tkachuk in Florida. They're just so much fun to watch. And, we went through the Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin era. Those guys are still playing at a high level, but Crosby winning the 3 Stanley Cups, Ovechkin winning a cup, and now sort of passing the baton over to the newer generation of NHL stars.
And great news that they're going to be able to play in the Olympics in the next 2 Olympics, which to me, those NHL Olympics brought hockey, for me as a hockey fan, to just an incredible level. And you called those games.
No,
So.
I agree with you, Lou. Getting the opportunity to call the games in 2002, 6, 10, and 14 at the Olympics, just watching the highest level of hockey. It was like watching every team was an all-star team, whether it was the US, Canada, Sweden, Finland, Russia, Czech Republic. And then the last two Olympics, unfortunately for various reasons, the NHL players did not go. It was still fun to be a part of, both in 2018 in Pyeongchang, and then in 2022, we called the games from Stamford, Connecticut. It was the back end of the pandemic, so we didn't travel. And then calling the women's gold medal game in 2018, I think the women's hockey in Pyeongchang had even more eyeballs on it because of the fact that the NHL players weren't there. So that's one of the great memories of my broadcasting career, calling the gold medal game between the U.S. and Canada on the women's side in 2018. It went to a shootout, and the U.S. won the game 3-2.
Yeah,
and I feel like
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Alex. I'm sorry.
I feel like we'd see that in your book, A Mike for All Seasons, right? I mean, that's part of your whole history in that book right there, isn't it?
Absolutely. That's certainly a big topic. The gold medal game in 2018 and all of the Olympics that I called. There's an entire chapter on the Olympics and the work that I was fortunate to do for NBC. I know you had the book with you last night, Alex, and so glad that you're enjoying it. It was published about 4 months ago in October, and the book has its own Instagram site, A Mike for All Seasons. You can follow the travels of the book, but it was a lot of fun just telling so many of the stories that I've accumulated over the last 30 plus years.
Well,
now I'm sure you have in the book, and I'm going to total transparency. I haven't read it yet, so it's on my to-do list. But like you've done everything, and I don't know how you keep the travel schedule that you keep. And I'm sure in other interviews people ask you about that. But how do you keep the travel schedule that you keep? And you go from one game to another. And I'm a sports guy, and I listen to a lot of sports and watch a lot of sports. You never make a mistake. You're always at the top of your game. It seems like that's the only game that you have done that week. Never mind that you did something 20 hours earlier in another city. How do you do that?
Well, I appreciate it, Lou. It does get pretty hectic at times. The most hectic time of the year is probably October, November, December, when it's football, hockey, and some basketball as well. Now it's hockey for the most part with the Rangers and TNT and some Knicks games, 3 to 4 a month. But it's a lot of fun. It is a bit of a jigsaw puzzle of a schedule, and I've been so fortunate to be involved in as many sports as I have. There have been some periods where I've called 3 or 4 different sports within the span of a weekend or 4 days, and those are really the most fun times for me. I feel like the more that I have going on, the more organized I am. For whatever reason, I got a lot of work done on planes and on airports and in hotels. This week feels kind of light. I'm off today as we speak, although I will go to the practices at MetLife Stadium, but not officially working. So no game today, no game tomorrow. I'll work Sunday and then an off day Monday. But it gets a little more hectic in March. But again, very fortunate to be involved in so many different sports. 30 years with Fox on the NFL side, 28 years with MSG, and now year 3 with the NHL on TNT. We called the Stanley Cup Final, our crew, last year between Vegas and Florida. This year, we'll take it through the conference final. It rotates every year,
right?
TNT and ESPN as far as the Stanley Cup Final. But you're right. A lot of airplanes, a lot of hotel rooms, but
and a lot of index cards, right, Kenny? A lot of index cards.
Never really feel like I'm working. There's a lot of work and travel that goes into it, but it's just so much fun.
And a lot of index cards, right, Kenny?
Index cards, folders, charts. I have a huge file cabinet next to me with about 95% of the game charts that I've used through the years on the various sports, and I'll refer back whenever I have a team again, to some of the information. So a lot of useless information stored up here as well, names, numbers, statistics, but hard to believe it's 30 years, and was so happy to get out so many of the stories in the book, which was published a couple of months ago, and hopefully there'll be enough stories for a sequel someday.
Now, Lou, I'm sure you saw it. I'm sure you saw this also. You were so proud, Kenny, to be part of that 30-year anniversary on Fox Sports. You have been calling that for as long as that time. Is that right? Because it seemed like you were part of that for all 30 years of that.
Right. We started in 1994, and Fox hired 4 young play-by-play announcers. We were all really fortunate. We were in the right place at the right time. Joe Buck, Kevin Harlan, Tom Brenneman, and I were all hired back in 94, and here we are somehow 30 seasons later. I know there are folks who keep track of this stuff. Somehow I'm approaching 500 NFL games, which is hard to believe. It feels like the first game was just last week. It was on September 4th, 94, 9/4/94, between the LA Rams and the Arizona Cardinals. And 30 years have passed since that time.
That's fantastic. Can he ever come close to missing a game, because of travel?
Fortunately, no. There have been some, hectic travel days. I cover a lot of it. There's a travel chapter in the book. There have been 6 or 7 hour car rides overnight, et cetera, at times due to cancellations or snowstorms. But knock on wood, very fortunate that I've never actually missed a game that I was supposed to be at.
Oh, we hope that continues, obviously.
One time I missed one with a sore throat back in the late 90s, a Ranger radio game, but that wasn't due to a travel issue.
I gotcha.
So for those who are aspiring to be where you are at, I mean, the younger generations, what's your message? Because obviously they see you traveling around. I see you traveling around. I'm like, that's a job I want to have one day, because that is so awesome. Seeing you do all this, basketball one night, football another day, hockey the next night. I mean, what's your message for the generation, for those that want to be in those shoes one day?
Well, I speak to a lot of high school and college students throughout the year, sportscasting camps in the summer, all around the New York, New Jersey area. Some of the biggest pieces of advice that I always give, first of all, do as much as you can during your high school and college years, whether it's internships, working at a school radio station, a school TV program. So many of the colleges have great journalism and broadcasting departments. And also, don't pigeonhole yourself into just the one area that you're interested in. If you want to be on air, in front of the camera, in front of the microphone, also learn some of the behind-the-scenes jobs as well, because you never know what opportunities might come up in the future. So, these days, there are so many more opportunities than when I was that age. I went to NYU and worked on the radio station. We called basketball games on the men's and women's side, but we also had to fight for airtime with the music department, with the DJs. The internet did not exist back then. Now, if you go to a college that might not have a radio station or might offer limited time to the sports folks, you can go broadcast, for example, a soccer game on the internet. You don't even need the radio station as the outlet. So if you know where to look, there are so many opportunities out there, and just try and do as much as you can.
Ken, any sporting event that you haven't done that's on your bucket list?
Lou, I've been real lucky again, to call Stanley Cup finals on both TV and radio. Have called baseball playoffs, NFL playoffs, NBA playoffs. Worked one Super Bowl. It was the world feed, the international feed, so it wasn't on in the United States, but it was on elsewhere. So, the goal is to just try and keep working. I love working the big events, obviously, whether it's season games, no matter the sport. Worked the 8 Olympics, 6 Winter Olympics, 2 summers. So would just love to keep working as many of those big events as possible.
Now, obviously, you've done the Winter Classic. You've done outdoor games before. Any challenges, any different doing a game in a conventional arena and say like on Sunday at MetLife Stadium?
Absolutely. The outdoor games for me are the most challenging games I work all year, because the broadcast booth is so far back. So much higher and further back from the ice than in conventional arenas. So just worked the Winter Classic in Seattle. And I love the outdoor games. It's a great experience. It's a fun experience. The fans in every city love it. All the games are sold out. The NHL has sold 140,000 tickets for the 2 outdoor games at MetLife Stadium this weekend, the Flyers and Devils, Rangers and Islanders. So tremendous events. But from a play-by-play standpoint, certainly challenging.
No, I would understand that. That's for sure. And let
me ask you this, because obviously growing up, you had dad, you had your uncle, but how did you sort of grow your own personality? Was it from watching them, or how did you grow your own personality?
Watched and listened to them all the time, as well as so many other broadcasters. Growing up in New York, we had 9 professional teams, so I was always listening to the radio, watching games on TV. I think, Alex, to your point, one of the greatest experiences of my life were the 5 years right out of college when I worked 2 years in Baltimore calling minor league hockey, and then 3 years in Washington calling Capitals games and filling in on some basketball and baseball, and really felt that I was able to establish my own identity in a different market and getting the reps, getting the experience. So I think that went a long way, towards where I am now, just calling 80 hockey games a year on the radio, Baltimore Skipjacks, and many of them without a color analyst. Some of them I had an analyst, and others I did not. So those 5 years were very important.
Tell us about your famous roommate, Barry Trotz. I know you talk about that sometimes also on TV and elsewhere.
Right. And there's a couple of stories in the book about the time we spent together. I was a 22-year-old broadcaster hired by the Skipjacks. Barry was 26 or 27. He was our assistant coach. And to save money, the team had us room together on the road for 2 years. So we'd share a hotel room on every road trip, the radio guy and the assistant coach. And Barry's a great guy. He's gone on to become the 3rd winningest coach in NHL history, won a Stanley Cup with Washington, did a terrific job with the Islanders. He's now back in Nashville as the general manager. And I won't ruin the story for those who haven't read the book yet, but one of my favorite stories in the book has to do with a prank that Barry pulled on me, a fake arrest up in Sydney, Nova Scotia. So that was back in 1992, and it's a story that he still tells to this day whenever we get together and see each other.
When your daughters travel with you and your family travels with you, how cool is that to share that experience with them?
Yeah, it is cool. And I had the opportunity when I was younger to do the same thing with my father and with my parents, to travel around. And it's a great learning experience as a youngster, is to see different cities and take trips. And my family had the opportunity, for example, when my kids were young, to come to a Pro Bowl in Hawaii that I was working, to NHL playoff games around the country, to a Super Bowl in Indianapolis. So it was a lot of fun on my end, and I got to return the favor when they were younger.
Kenny, you had mentioned that the 2018 Olympic shootout between U.S. and Canada, the women's gold medal, was one of the highlights of your broadcast career. Is there any other that come into that that play? I know it's hard to pick one, but one that stands out more than the other few personally.
It is hard to pick one, and I write about a lot of them in the book. The Rangers, when they won the Cup in '94, I wasn't working here yet, but I was calling that series on NHL radio, and they won the first Cup in 54 years. So many hockey playoff games, football divisional games in the playoffs that I worked. The one that I get asked about a lot is the Bautista bat flip, the home run in the 2015 Toronto, Texas playoff series. I was on the mic for that one on Fox. On the hockey side, the Rangers run to the final in 2014, calling 2 of the last 3 Stanley Cup final series on TV in the U.S., one on NBC, one on TNT. So many memories during NFL games. I had the Victor Cruz 99-yard touchdown for the Giants against the Jets.
Yeah, I know. I'm a Jet fan. I remember that.
So sorry I brought that up. I had the crazy play in Las Vegas last year with the Patriots and Raiders, the laterals at the end of the game, and Chandler Jones' interception. He returned it for a touchdown. So I do chronicle a lot of those events in the book, but those are some of the ones that certainly stand out.
Now, I got to say, you did lose a very dear colleague of yours, Tony Siragusa, and you, Johnston, and him always had a great flow, I thought, on Sundays.
Right. We had so much fun. Worked with Moose Johnston and Tony Siragusa for 8 full seasons on NFL games. We called a lot of big games, 5 divisional playoff games, a Pro Bowl, some college bowl games with Moose. But Tony was a great man. He was a character. Unfortunately, he passed away about a year and a half ago, and think about him all the time. But he's in the book a lot as well. Some of the stories from our days together and some of the things that we did away from the stadium and away from the broadcast booth.
Well, Kenny, the privilege is that we have you've been on the interview circuit a lot, but to know you personally is also adding to this, and I'm really thankful that you've taken the time. But I got to share one story because my dad passed away this past April, But if you remember, you were behind the plate with us before the Dodgers Mets series, and I'll never forget that.
Well, it's hard to believe how long ago we met, Alex, and I have such great memories of seeing you and your dad at Shea Stadium and Yankee Stadium and Citi Field in more recent years. And we were reminiscing last night. You're 32 now. We met when you were around 7 at the Viscardi Center out on Long Island. So it's been about a quarter of a century. I've enjoyed following your life and career. So congratulations on all of your success, and thanks for having me on along with Lou. It's been great chatting with you guys, and hopefully we'll see you at the Garden again soon.
Definitely.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Kenny. And tell Steve I said hi, and if Al remembers me, but Steve definitely will remember me. That's for sure. Give him my best.
I will certainly pass along the regards.
And your dad, I was with the Nets when your dad was doing Nets games after he left the Knicks. He might remember me, but Steve definitely will.
Real quick, how is Dad? Just so we have an update.
Yeah, they're all doing well. Just spoke to each of them recently, and all living in the New York area, all retired, but doing very well.
When he retired that night on TNT, it was like an emotional moment for a lot of people. Was it emotional for you?
I was watching in a hotel room in Montreal during the Stanley Cup final. It was in July because it was during, the seasons were pushed back due to COVID. But I was glad that he got to finish up actually in an arena, because they had done so many games that year out of a studio, which was a lot different for all of us. So I was very happy that his last game, it was an NBA game in Atlanta, was out of an arena, and they were able to, look back on his career. Reggie Miller was the color analyst and had some very nice words that night, and they did a video tribute with old photos and videos. But like I said, happy that it was actually in person and not out of a studio.
Yeah, one last thing before we go, talking about your dad. Obviously, in the mid-'60s, when sports kind of got to that next level, was beginning to get to the next level as far as interest goes, your dad was Knicks, Rangers. He did Giants. He did the news, the sports news on later on Channel 4, 6 and 11. He was the guy. And people now have all this access to get watching any game that they want. And I'm sure your dad remembers this. Rangers on WHN, really no road games. The first and second period, only the last 6 minutes were broadcast. And then the whole third period were broadcast. To where we've come so far in the last 50 years of sports media and sports broadcasting is just incredible.
It is. It's crazy. And I've heard a lot about those days before I was born, when only the last 6 minutes of the first two periods would be broadcasted on the radio, and then the entire third period. But back then in the 70s, when I was growing up, there was no cable. So you got your sports news on Channel 4, Channel 2 with Warner Wolf, Channel 7 with Sal Marciano. That was before the days of Sports Center and CNN. So great memories for me. It was well before Alex's time, but things are a lot different these days in the media landscape.
Absolutely. Kenny, one last thing. I heard your dad do recreations. When the Dodgers and Giants, this was like 65, 66, when Koufax and the Dodgers won on the last day of the season. Heard your dad did recreations. I actually heard some recreations. It was on WHN 1050 back in the old days.
And I know he did some of that when he was in college at Syracuse, with Syracuse Chiefs minor league baseball games. They would receive the information on the ticker, each at bat, and then they would, like you said, recreate the game for the radio audience.
Alex has no idea what we're talking about, Kenny.
I don't, but I feel
like you'll explain it very well.
The adaptation of our time was you guys doing the games from home or in the studio, not at the arena. That was the adaptation we had watched you guys go through during the pandemic.
Right. That was a lot of different as well. I never did any from home. I know some other networks did, but did a lot of games out of the studio for NBC and for MSG, Knicks, Rangers games. So cover that in the book as well, in the COVID pandemic chapter, but certainly wild times. And then I was up in the NHL bubble, which I also write about in the book, for 37 days in Edmonton. On many of those days, had the opportunity to call 2 games a day, and twice, along with Pierre Maguire, we called 3 NHL playoff games in one day. So that was actually a lot of fun, and something that will probably never happen again.
Now, Lou, you might love this reference, but you were heard on AM 970 The Answer as well. We carried a few Ranger games over the years. So I know you're on our home network as well sometimes through simulcast.
Right, right. I remember those games well.
Thank you, Kenny. I appreciate it. I really
Thanks,
appreciate it.
Alex. Thanks, Lou. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kenny Albert, on One Leg Up on Sports.
Great stuff. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.